Walls. In the scriptures, walls sometimes needed to go up and sometimes needed to go down. In Nehemiah's day, Jerusalem was in shambles. The walls of Jerusalem had been broken down and they needed to be raised up. In Joshua's day, the walls of Jericho needed to be brought down. In the New Testament, a great wall had long separated the Jews and the Gentiles, and that wall needed to come down. In Ephesians chapter 2, we read in verse 14, "For he himself is our peace, Jesus, who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace." You see, the goal was the unity and oneness among all nations of believers in Christ. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, really we're reading about the idea of walls and breaking down walls. The Apostle Paul there writes, "Now all things are of God, who has reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ, and has given us the ministry of reconciliation." Peace and reconciliation was the divine objective. You see, God's people still have the ministry of reconciliation today. Racial walls have been erected and reinforced in our day and for many years before. And these walls, they're contrary to God's will. And so, how do we bring down those walls? With laws? Well, laws have helped with externals, things like buses and schools and drinking fountains and restrooms. But friends, these changes are incomplete and insufficient from a biblical standpoint. The walls God most wants to break down involve our hearts. And those walls can only be brought down by living out the teachings of Jesus Christ, by all of us. In the early to mid-1900s, an African-American preacher in the Church of Christ named Marshall Keeble demonstrated the power of one man living out Christ's teaching in helping to bring down walls. Brother Keeble's father grew up in the home of John Bell Keeble, dean of Vanderbilt University's law school. His parents, Keeble's parents, had been slaves, and they grew up in deep poverty with limited formal education. This didn't hinder Keeble. He became a very powerful gospel preacher. In fact, Keeble baptized 40,000 or so people and established hundreds of congregations. That was a great work in itself, but he also brought down walls. One writer referenced what Brother Reuel Lemons wrote in an editorial in his publication, Firm Foundation. Keeble did far more to break down any racial barriers that existed than anyone then alive, traveling for 70 years among blacks and whites alike, equally loved by both, preaching the gospel of peace. Nevertheless, in the words of one of his many biographers, he did not escape the suffering that is promised to all of those who proclaim God's good news in every age, or the humiliation imposed on every American of African descent in his time and place. He preached with guns pointed at his head, and he also preached while being struck with brass knuckles and rocks, never dropping a syllable. Here was a man who, in this respect, truly evidenced the very spirit of Jesus Christ in the face of his tormentors. Emil Harris writes in the Christian Chronicle on April the 3rd, 2018, Marshall Keeble fought racism by melting hearts. He endured taunts and threats from white supremacists and once was forced to read a racist note from members of the Ku Klux Klan during a gospel meeting. On another occasion, a group of Klansmen sat on the front row while Keeble preached. One even came forward to be baptized. As one church historian observed, Brother Keeble suffered all these indignities in silence without any observable resentment. He was a master of persuasion and thinking on his feet. During a gospel meeting in Memphis, Tennessee, he noticed that a rope line had been set up to separate blacks from whites attending the event. He said, "I can't preach over those ropes." And the organizers took them down. Today, we're talking about taking down walls Jesus' way. And I have a brother here today, dear friend and brother, who I want to introduce to you after a song, who's going to talk some more about what it means to live out Jesus' teaching in bringing down walls.
There's a happy land of promise over in the great beyond, where the Savior is just in the glory share, where the souls of men shall enter and live on forevermore. Everybody will be happy over there. Everybody will be happy, will be happy over there. We will shout and sing as praises to once ever raise. Everybody will be happy over there. There's a ransom of all ages will be singing round the throne in the banner of echoes of fair. And the Christians of all nations will join in the triumph song. Everybody will be happy over there. Everybody will be happy, will be happy over there. We will shout and sing as praises to once ever raise. Everybody will be happy over there. There's no need no one who saved us, and who kept us by his grace, and who brought us to the land so bright and fair. We will praise his name forever as we look upon his face. Everybody will be happy over there. Everybody will be happy, will be happy over there. We will shout and sing his praises to once ever raise. Everybody will be happy over there.
We're talking about walls today, and we're talking specifically about breaking down racial walls. And you may be thinking, well, what could I possibly do? But there are things you can do. And what you need to do is simply live out the teaching of Jesus Christ. I have with me today a good friend and brother, Jermaine Smith, who shared with me a story about him and his mother growing up that was one of the most moving and inspirational stories that I've ever heard. And it dealt with simply following the teachings of Jesus Christ when dealing with some of these racial issues. And so today I've just asked Brother Jermaine if he would to just share a little bit about this story and his experience from way back when.
Well, I thank you for having me here today. And it's a beautiful thing to share this experience. I don't talk about it much, but it was a life-changing experience, and it was a preparation for manhood, basically, that Mom gave me. And she put before me, basically, the principle of Romans 12:21, be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. So easy to say, but it's harder to do, but it can be done. And facing a new stage in my life where Mom and Dad were divorced, going to manhood, supposedly going into 6th grade, Mom sent me to a private school. And in that direction, going to a private school was a little different. And it was a Catholic school, and not to say that those that practiced that type of belief were racist, but I faced racism on a massive scale. So follow me a little bit through this narrative, and my intention is that it helps someone to recognize that doing it God's way is the best way. And so getting ready to go to this school, St. Pat's is what it was called, and as I'm walking to the school. You know, of course, the nerves are there and everything is unfamiliar. So I get to the yard where all the kids are playing, and the principal comes out, and she begins to say that everybody line up, and she starts announcing names. So we line up, and we start to proceed to walk to the classroom. But before I entered into the school, before I had a chance to actually see what the school looked like, I was attacked by a verbal missile, and it was the N-word. So this young man turned around, and he said the N-word in a way that I've never heard it before in my life. And my world shook up at that time. The intenseness of his wording, the hatred in his eyes, and the emotional gymnastics that my heart went through during that time. At the time that word was said, immediately I began to question all the compliments that my mother gave me and the identity of you're a nice young man, you're a kind young man, and all the identity began to be questioned and confusion began to set in. So as he said those words, what began to happen is a natural defense of the flesh. And we began a physical altercation.
Yeah.
And with that physical altercation, we were sent to the office, to the principal's office. And when we did that, the principal actually let the young man go back to class. And then you feel like the authority would have a type of response of comfort, of having a resolution to the situation, but it was only contrary. What began to happen is that she said to me that your kind don't come here starting trouble. Now, not only am I confused by the arsenal or the missile of that word, that N-word, now I'm confused that I was always told to go to authority and authority would work things out. And I got the opposite. So now I'm confused. And then now she tells me to go back to class. So I go to class with this confusion, heartbroken, not understanding, no friends, unfamiliar areas. So what begins to happen, if anyone has played sports in football, when someone is on the offensive, you automatically are protective or on the defense. So now I became a defensive kind of person to protect my spirit, to protect my physical being. So every single day, we began to have a physical altercation, whether it was in the hallway, whether it was outside at recess, lunch. Not only that, the words during class, times that I would raise my hand and jokes would be said. The teachers would actually ignore me in class. Then notes would come across and they would talk about my physical appearance, my lips, my hair. And this was every single day. So now I'm in an unfamiliar area, attacked by words the first day. The authority, there's no type of security there. And then I'm fist fighting every single day, not wanting to, but I did every single day to protect myself. So now, day in and day out, discouraged, not wanting to be there. And now the curriculum is at a higher level than I'm used to. So now on top of everything else, now I'm put in a position to learn at an extensive rate. Well, fast forwarding to the next year, that the beginning of that school year, the school had a thing called Fun Day. And, that Fun Day was, getting all the cobwebs out, for being off of school. Well, I was reluctant to want to go. And mom had to do all kind of things to bribe me. She brought me a new bike at the time, promised me this and promised me that. But the whole time, mom had a plan to develop something in me to have a real experience of the real world. And she said, son, you got to trust me and you must stick in there. So now going into 7th grade year, going to Fun Day, the young man that my friend that I started the school with, he actually got into a physical altercation. He said, I couldn't take it anymore, and he got expelled. So the second week of school, the ringleader, the first day of school, who used that verbal missile, his mother had died, and they didn't know that she had cancer and she had passed away. And not knowing that mom was about to teach me the greatest lesson of my life, of denying myself and loving others beyond me, and letting love win, and letting Jesus's words prevail. So the young man, his mother passed away, and mom said that, son, we're going to go get the pastries that are conducive to his culture, which he was Sicilian. And we took those pastries and a card over to his home and knocked on his door, and not wanting to go, in tears first and foremost in the car, but mom said, son, trust me. You're about to learn the greatest lesson of your life. I knocked on the door. The father came to the door, and, with his broken English. And I said, sir, I just want to offer my condolences unto you for the loss of your wife, and to the young man for the loss of his mother. The father at the door hugged me, and he cried right there, that somebody from, his son's school that we thought were friends came to the house to give that gift. So he called his son downstairs, says, son, your friend is here at the door. He came downstairs, and I said, sir, we're not friends. I said, I've been fighting your son every single day since the first day of school. He's attacked me with racial slurs, letters, anything he could possibly do to hurt me. And we're not friends. But nevertheless, I'm here today to offer my condolences and hopefully some kind of a peace offering. Because if anybody lost their mom, it hurts. So this is what I'm here for today. The son was shocked, or the young man was shocked. He busted out in tears. And what it came down to is realizing that he was fighting an image of someone of color had actually hurt him, because the father had made a comment and says, I didn't raise you like that. What do you mean that you're attacking this young man, and why have you done it? So I guess the point that really got me is that none of his friends that he led in the attack against me came to the house. And his response of humbling his heart was, the fact is, he says that you cared enough to come to me at this time. That began the dialogue in the exchange of truth and healing at that moment. And he didn't even tell his father that he had been attacked by a man of color. And therefore, he was fighting me and taking it out on me, and his father never knew it. But it was the very act of that love that broke down the walls. And not only that, the father at that time said he was so touched that he invited me to the funeral, and he says, come sit with the family. Not only that, the very next school day, that young man went to those very minions, or those who he led, and he stood up and said, this is now my friend. He says, we will no longer do those things, and if you do that against him, you stand against me. The power of that love, the power of that thought, not only taught him, but also taught me. But what did it do? Not only did it free him, the father, it gave us a type of understanding of how walls are to be broken down. Not knowing that mom was going to teach me that lesson. Not knowing that it was going to solve the fact is I was fighting these men physically with physical force every single day. But it wasn't until I surrendered to that very thought of Jesus, be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good, that not only did it put a stop to the young man, but it put a stop to those that were following him, and it made peace between us both. That was life-changing for me. And I think about how the Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds and imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself above the knowledge of God. This young man was fighting an image. He wasn't fighting me per se, even though I felt the pain, I felt the hurt. But the reality is that mom taught me a great example. Take responsibility for you. You can't control others, but you can take responsibility for you. You know, the Bible tells us also in Ephesians 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Sometimes we don't even realize what we're fighting against, but the scriptures gives us great evidence and distinction of what the fight is about. And not only that, to be able to recognize that God's word and God's way is the best way to tear down walls.
That's beautiful, powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us today. I think it's an important little detail to add here that it wasn't like Brother Jermaine at this stage in his life was the tiniest kid in school and he was getting picked on, and that there was something there that we need to feel sorry for Jermaine. Now, if you know Jermaine, some of you watching today do know, he is, among other things, he's a fitness trainer, and he is a strong individual. I think his bench press is around 590 pounds, and so a very strong individual. And back then, he still was a good-sized young man at 12, 13 years old. He was a boy, but he was the size of a man. And so he was able to defend himself. But what we heard in the story was there is another kind of strength. And this is the kind of strength that we need to teach our children, not only by word, by example. And that's the kind of strength he alluded to, Ephesians 6, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Natural for a young man at his age being picked on to defend himself. But what Jermaine's mom taught him was something that was even bigger and more important. And that was what it's like to be strong in the Lord. You know what takes strength? It takes strength not to get in those physical altercations. It takes strength, mental and emotional and spiritual strength, not to attack back, not to fight back, but to have that self-control, that is, as Jermaine mentioned, that self-denial, to say, I know what the flesh is drawing me and pushing me to do, but I'm going to respond like Jesus would have me to respond. And so I appreciate so much Jermaine, but you know, Jermaine couldn't have done what Jermaine did that day had it not been for the teaching of a godly woman, a godly mother. And so we hope that today that you know these walls that are up, these walls between, sometimes it's people of different race, sometimes there are different walls that separate us from others. That's not God's will. That's not what Jesus wants. Jesus has given to us the ministry of reconciliation. And by following the teaching of Jesus, instead of what people are telling us, friends, and what the world is teaching us, we as individuals can make a difference. And so we hope you'll stay with us, and we'll tell you how you can get a copy of this message, and we'll tell you how you can get other Bible study materials that can be helpful for you in following the example of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Jermaine. Appreciate you for being with us today.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother.
Trials sparkle every hand, and we cannot understand all the ways that God will lead us to that blessed promised land. But He'll guide us with His eye, and we'll follow till we die. We will understand it better by and by. You know that by and by, when the Lord
Thank you for watching Let the Bible Speak. If you'd like to get a copy of this message, number 1295, Breaking Down Racial Walls, you can contact us by phone or by email, and we'll get that to you at no charge. We always, of course, appreciate and welcome your comments and your questions. Please reach out to us if you have something you'd like to share with us. You can get started on our Bible course, our Bible correspondence course, 6-lesson course, The Truth Frees, and that also is at no charge to you. If you'd like to look at more gospel messages, you can visit letthebiblespeak.com, where you can watch videos, hear audio, and review transcripts of 500 gospel messages. On behalf of the program, we say, as the Apostle Paul said in Romans 16, verse 16, the churches of Christ salute you. Until next week, may God bless you.